What if I told you the most important battlefield of the 21st century isn't in the South China Sea or Taiwan or even in space, it's in shipyards? And what if I told you that right now, for every one major warship the United States produces, China is launching roughly 3? That's not a slogan, that's math. And if you care about global power, trade routes, or the balance of the Pacific, you need to understand why this gap exists and why it's widening. Most people think naval power is about technology, aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, hypersonic missiles. But here's what mainstream analysis gets wrong. Naval dominance is increasingly about industrial capacity, steel, labor hours, dry docks, and production speed, the unglamorous stuff. So let me give you a framework to understand this. There are 3 forces driving what I call the shipyard gap. First, China's state-directed industrial ecosystem. Second, America's fragmented and financially optimized defense production model. Third, the commercial-to-military integration advantage that Beijing has quietly perfected. If you want to understand why China builds 3 warships while the US builds 1, just look at the docks. Let's start with force number 1, scale through state coordination. In 2023, China's shipbuilding industry accounted for approximately 50.2% of global commercial ship completions. The United States, less than 0.1%. That's not a typo, 0.1%. This is 50.2%, not about half. Meanwhile, China State Shipbuilding Corporation, or CSSC, is the largest shipbuilder on Earth by tonnage. Here's what matters. Those same shipyards that produce container ships and LNG carriers can be mobilized, repurposed, or dual-tasked for military production. When I was in Shanghai a few years ago, I visited an industrial port zone where civilian and naval construction facilities were separated by little more than a fence line. A senior maritime analyst told me off the record, in China, commercial capacity is latent military capacity. Let that sink in. In 2022 alone, China launched more naval tonnage than the entire British Royal Navy possesses in total. And that pace hasn't slowed. The People's Liberation Army Navy now fields more than 370 battle force ships compared to roughly 291 for the U.S. Navy. This is 370, not around 350. Let me show you what this actually means. Production speed compounds power. If one country can replace losses, modernize fleets, and scale hull numbers faster, it changes deterrence calculations. War games conducted by U.S. think tanks increasingly assume higher attrition rates in a Taiwan scenario. But here's the uncomfortable question. Can America replace ships quickly enough? Stay with me, because what comes next changes everything. China's shipbuilding output isn't just large, it's concentrated. CSSC was formed through massive state consolidation, merging competing entities into one coordinated giant. That eliminates redundancy. It streamlines supply chains. It allows centralized planning. Here's what nobody tells you. Fragmentation is expensive. In contrast, the U.S. has 7 primary shipyards capable of building large naval vessels and only 4 that produce the majority of major combatants. Many are privately owned. They answer to shareholders. They optimize for quarterly earnings. Now ask yourself, what happens when national security competes with quarterly profit guidance? The weapon that was supposed to create strength, market efficiency, became the weakness. That's the paradox. And this connects to something even bigger, which I'll show you in a minute. Because the shipyard gap isn't just about counting hulls, it's about time. China can build faster because its yards are active year-round on commercial contracts. The workforce stays sharp. The supply chain stays warm. The capital investment never idles. In the United States, naval contracts are often episodic, funding delays, continuing resolutions, workforce layoffs between major projects. A senior procurement officer once admitted publicly that unpredictable budgeting adds months, sometimes years, to timelines. Let me show you the numbers that matter. The average construction time for a U.S. Virginia-class submarine has stretched beyond 66 months. Chinese conventional submarines are produced on shorter cycles. Destroyers like the Type 052D have been launched in batches that would be politically unthinkable in Washington. Here's what makes people uncomfortable. Industrial decline is slow, then sudden. Most Americans still assume overwhelming naval superiority, but superiority in capability doesn't automatically translate to superiority in capacity. And in a prolonged conflict, capacity wins. So Force 1, state-coordinated industrial scale, explains how China builds at speed. But it doesn't fully explain why the U.S. builds so slowly. Because the second force isn't about China at all. It's about America's own system and the incentives baked into it. And once you see that clearly, you'll understand why this gap may persist longer than policymakers admit. And the second force, it operates completely differently. Let me show you. So here's the second force at work, and this one operates completely differently. If the first force was about China's coordinated scale, the second is about America's defense production model, optimized for profit margins, not production speed. Let me ask you something in the first minute. When was the last time the United States treated shipbuilding like a national industrial mission instead of a procurement program? That question alone explains half the gap. Most people think America spends more, therefore America builds more. In 2023, the U.S. defense budget was approximately $816.7 billion. China's official defense budget was about $224.8 billion. This is $816.7 billion, not around 800. So how is it possible that the country spending more than 3 times as much builds fewer hulls? Here's what mainstream analysis gets wrong. Spending is not the same as buildings. A massive portion of the U.S. defense budget goes toward personnel, pensions, overseas bases, R&D, and legacy systems. Shipbuilding accounts for only a slice, and even within that slice, costs have ballooned. The lead ship of the Ford-class aircraft carrier program came in at roughly $13.3 billion, a single vessel. Let me show you what this actually means. When cost per ship rises, total fleet size shrinks unless budgets explode. The United States Navy operates 11 aircraft carriers. China operates 2 operational carriers with a third on sea trials. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Carriers are symbols of power, not measures of production health. Destroyers, frigates, submarines, those are the volume game, and volume is where the shipyard gap widens. In the past decade, China has launched more than 30 Type 052D and Type 055 destroyers combined. The U.S. Navy in that same period commissioned fewer than 20 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. This is not about quality debates, it's about throughput. I talked to a defense analyst in Washington who told me off the record, "We build masterpieces, they build fleets." That sentence stuck with me. Here's what matters. The U.S. system incentivizes complexity. Contractors bid low to win contracts, then costs grow through modifications and delays. Congressional districts fight to protect jobs, spreading production across states to secure votes. Politically smart, industrially inefficient. This is the part that should surprise you. The average age of U.S. shipyard infrastructure is over 50 years. Some dry docks date back to World War II. Meanwhile, China has invested heavily in modern automated facilities. Massive gantry cranes, modular assembly, digital design integration. When I spoke with a logistics consultant who had visited both U.S. and Chinese facilities, he said the difference felt like comparing a renovated industrial museum to a next-generation manufacturing campus. That's not an insult, that's an observation. And here's the paradox. The system that made America innovative, decentralized competition, struggles when the mission requires unified scale. Stay with me, because what comes next changes everything. The U.S. Navy has publicly acknowledged it needs at least 355 ships to meet strategic demands. Yet the fleet hovers around 291 battle force ships. Even maintaining current levels is difficult due to retirements outpacing new construction in certain years. This is 291, not about 300. Precision matters. Let me show you the numbers that matter. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that achieving and sustaining a 355 ship fleet could require average annual shipbuilding budgets exceeding $30 billion for decades. And that assumes no major cost overruns. Now compare that to China's model. Their yards build commercial vessels continuously. Warships slot into a living ecosystem. Labor doesn't disappear between contracts. Steel suppliers don't shut down lines. Here's what nobody tells you. Industrial muscle atrophies when it's not used. In the United States, skilled shipyard workers are aging. Training pipelines struggle to replace them fast enough. Labor shortages delay submarine production. The Navy has already acknowledged that delivery schedules for Virginia-class submarines are behind plan. And this connects to something even bigger. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button, because this conversation rarely happens in public with this level of clarity. The second force isn't incompetence. It's incentives. America's defense industry is designed to maximize technological edge and shareholder return. China's system is designed to maximize output and national capacity. Different goals, different outcomes. Most people think the solution is just spend more. But here's what's really happening. Unless incentives change, higher spending simply produces more expensive ships, not more ships. And that brings us to the third force, the one that ties commercial dominance directly to military acceleration. Because what China has done with its commercial shipping empire creates an advantage that goes beyond warships. It affects supply chains, logistics, and even wartime resilience. And once you see how that integration works, you'll understand why the shipyard gap is not just a naval issue, it's a systems-level advantage. Let me show you. So here's the third force. And this is the one most analysts underestimate. If the first force was state-coordinated scale, and the second was America's incentive structure, the third is integration. Commercial dominance feeding military acceleration in a closed loop. This is where the shipyard gap stops being about warships and starts being about systems. Let me ask you something. What happens when the world's largest commercial shipbuilding base, the world's largest merchant fleet, and the world's fastest-growing navy all sit inside the same national strategy? Here's what mainstream analysis gets wrong. They treat commercial shipping and naval power as separate categories. In China, they are strategically intertwined. China controls roughly 19% of the global merchant fleet by ownership. It builds over half of the world's commercial vessels. And through companies like Costco, it operates terminals in more than 36 overseas ports. This is 36, not dozens. Let me show you what this actually means. Shipyards that build container vessels refine modular construction techniques. Those techniques reduce build times for destroyers. Civilian heavy-lift cranes install sections for LNG carriers, and then lift modules for naval hulls. Engineers rotate between commercial and military projects. Supply chains remain hot, continuous, scalable. When I was in Beijing last year, a senior economist told me off the record, industrial policy is not about peacetime efficiency. It's about wartime optionality. That sentence reframed everything for me. Here's what matters. Integration reduces friction. The United States largely separated commercial shipbuilding from naval production decades ago. Today, the U.S. builds very few large commercial vessels domestically. That means fewer shared suppliers, fewer shared welders, fewer shared designers. Industrial ecosystems shrink when they're isolated, and this is the part that should terrify planners. In a prolonged conflict, logistics wins wars. Oil tankers, cargo ships, repair docks, replacement hulls. The uncomfortable truth is that China's commercial fleet can serve as strategic depth, not in some conspiracy sense, but in industrial resilience. capacity that can be redirected. Most people think naval power equals aircraft carriers. But here's what's really happening. Sustainment is power. If you want to understand global maritime strength, just look at dry dock availability and steel throughput. Let me show you the numbers that matter. China's total shipbuilding capacity is estimated to exceed 23 million gross tons annually. The United States capacity is a fraction of that, measured in the low hundreds of thousands of gross tons for large vessels. This is 23 million, not over 20 million. Precision reveals scale. Stay with me, because what comes next changes everything. The Pentagon has warned publicly that China's shipbuilding capacity is more than 200 times that of the United States. Think about that. 200 times. Even if you discount that figure for classification differences, the directional gap is undeniable. Here's what nobody tells you. Capacity compounds. Every year that China builds more commercial ships, it trains more workers. Every yard expansion increases surge potential. Every export contract strengthens supplier networks. It's a flywheel. Meanwhile, the U.S. faces bottlenecks in submarine production. The Navy has acknowledged it needs to produce 2 Virginia-class submarines per year while preparing for the Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine program. But workforce and supplier constraints make that target difficult. The weapon that was supposed to guarantee dominance, technological superiority, risks being diluted if it can't be produced at scale. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The shipyard gap is not just about today's fleet numbers, it's about trajectories. China's Navy has grown from fewer than 220 ships in the early 2000s to over 370 today. That's an increase of more than 150 ships in roughly 2 decades. This is not incremental growth, it's structural expansion. Most Americans assume time favors them, but industrial momentum favors whoever is building more, faster. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button, because these structural dynamics rarely get explained clearly. This connects to something even bigger. Global trade routes move approximately 80% of world merchandise by volume. Control, protection, and influence over those routes shape economic power. China doesn't just build warships, it builds the vessels that carry global trade. It builds the ports that receive them. It builds the cranes that unload them. So the third force, integration, turns commercial dominance into strategic leverage. But here's the question you should be asking now. If China has scale, incentives aligned for output, and commercial integration, does that mean the outcome is predetermined? Is the shipyard gap inevitable? Or is there a way the United States adapts? Because in the final part, I'm going to pull this together. I'll show you the framework that explains where this is heading, the 3 possible futures from here, and why the next decade, not the next 50 years, determines the maritime balance of power. And once you see those scenarios clearly, you won't look at a shipyard the same way again. Now, let me pull this together. If you've stayed with me this far, you already see that this isn't just a story about ships. It's about systems. It's about incentives. It's about industrial gravity. And here's the question you should be asking right now. Does building 3 warships to 1 automatically mean winning? Most people think more hulls equals inevitable dominance. But here's what's really happening. The shipyard gap, the gap between China's industrial scale and America's constrained production, is what I call the industrial velocity divide. It's not just about how many ships you have. It's about how fast you can replace them, upgrade them, and sustain them under stress. Here's what matters. Velocity beats inventory over time. China currently fields over 370 battle force ships. The U.S. operates roughly 291. This is 370 versus 291, not around 400 versus 300. Precision tells the story, but fleet size today is only a snapshot. The real issue is trajectory. When I spoke with a retired U.S. Navy planner last year, he told me something blunt. In the first 90 days of a high-end conflict, replacement capacity becomes destiny. That wasn't public messaging. That was strategic math. So let's break down the three possible futures from here. Scenario 1. America doubles down on technology over tonnage. In this world, the U.S. focuses on autonomous systems, unmanned vessels, AI-driven targeting, and undersea dominance. Instead of matching China ship for ship, it aims to make every platform exponentially more lethal. The bet is that quality offsets quantity. This is plausible. The U.S. still leads in nuclear submarine quieting, advanced propulsion, and carrier aviation. But here's the paradox. Advanced systems are often more complex and slower to produce. If each vessel costs $2.1 billion instead of $1.2 billion, output remains constrained. Let me show you what this actually means. If budgets don't increase dramatically and sustainably, fleet numbers stagnate, technological edge matters, but scale still pressures it. Scenario 2, industrial revival. Here's what mainstream thinking underestimates. The United States has reinvented its industrial base before. During World War II, American shipyards produced 2,710 Liberty ships in just 4 years. That's not mythology. That's 2,710 vessels. Stay with me because this changes the tone. If Washington aligns policy, stabilizes multi-year procurement, modernizes shipyards, and integrates commercial maritime policy, the shipyard gap could narrow. The CHIPS Act showed that industrial policy is no longer taboo in American politics. The question is whether shipbuilding receives similar urgency. Here's what nobody tells you. Revival requires patience. Shipyards cannot be scaled overnight. Workforce pipelines take years. Infrastructure upgrades take billions. This is not a one-election cycle fix. Scenario 3, managed asymmetry. In this outcome, the U.S. accepts that China will outbuild it in surface vessels but focuses on alliances. Japan, South Korea, Australia, NATO partners, distributed maritime power. If you want to understand this strategy, just look at AUKUS. Nuclear submarine collaboration spreads capability across trusted partners. Instead of competing alone, America amplifies through networks. Here's what makes people uncomfortable. Alliances depend on trust, and trust depends on consistency. Now let me synthesize all of this. The shipyard gap is not about who is stronger today. It's about who can endure tomorrow. China's model prioritizes scale, integration, and output velocity. America's model prioritizes innovation, profit optimization, and technological edge. Different philosophies, different risk profiles. The weapon that was supposed to guarantee American dominance, globalized efficiency, hollowed out certain industrial sectors. The strategy that was supposed to limit China's growth, engagement without guardrails, accelerated its industrial base. That's the uncomfortable truth. But inevitability is a dangerous word. Industrial systems respond to incentives. Policies change behavior. Budgets signal priorities. So here's the question I want you to think about. If you were designing maritime power for the next 30 years, would you choose fewer exquisite platforms or larger scalable fleets? Would you prioritize shareholder return or national redundancy? Would you separate commercial and military shipbuilding or fuse them? This connects to something even bigger, the future of globalization itself. Because 80% of global trade by volume still moves by sea. The nation that masters shipbuilding capacity shapes trade security, energy flows, and crisis response. This is not abstract geopolitics, it's structural power. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe, because we're going to keep dissecting the systems that actually shape global power, not the headlines that distract you. And I want to hear from you. Does the industrial velocity divide represent temporary imbalance or long-term shift? Can America reform its incentives fast enough? Or has the momentum already compounded too far? Drop your perspective in the comments. Because the real battle isn't just in shipyards, it's in the choices made right now.